Hey, everyone. Bring in everyone else. And I think the whole gang is here.
If you don't have
Welcome in, everybody, to post-game coverage of the Browns' alternately thrilling and nerve-wracking 18-13 win over the Jacksonville Jaguars. I'm Andrew Spade, joined by Jake Burns and Peter Moses. Gentlemen, this is a classic Browns game in that we need to do a wellness check first just to establish a baseline of how everybody is doing because it did come down to the last play. The tight end for the Jaguars had his hands on the ball in the end zone here. It felt like it might not work out. So I just want to kind of go around the room and make sure everybody's okay before we go any further.
Yeah, I mean, that was a game, right?
Yeah.
Like I don't really know what other way to say it. It felt like they could win it 10 times and it felt like they could lose it all the same at the same rate. So a wellness check is probably deserved for this scenario, and I can say I've had better Sundays, but I've certainly had worse, and we just experienced a worse one. And my messaging for this stuff all the time is never regret wins. Never have issues with wins in the NFL. They're really hard to come by, and it's better to fix your mistakes at 1-1 than it is to fix your mistakes at 0-2. So enjoy your victory Sunday evening and your victory Monday, which will be exciting for those who haven't experienced it in a little while now, which is a lot of us.
Yeah. All right. So Jake's okay. Peter, how are you?
I feel terrible.
Great. Great.
Back
Yeah.
to you.
That's Browns football at its finest, baby. I mean, that's what, like, we went through the absolute ringer. I'm not trying to make too much of it, but my headline for the game, and you're right, absolutely, Jake, that we should not turn our nose up at a win, no matter how ugly. But my headline for this game is the Jaguars tried like hell to give the Browns this football game, and eventually the Browns reluctantly accepted the gift. That would be the way that I would sum it up, because it just felt like there were a lot of opportunities for the Browns to really kind of pull away, put this one to bed for good, and they weren't able to do that until the very end. So it even involves some divine intervention in the form of it raining. I think the hardest that it rained all day for that last Jaguars drive. I doubt that impacted the play that much, but at the same time, you never know, right? So I think big picture, the number one thing that was coming into this game, the last thing we talked about on the pregame preview podcast was what Deshaun Watson shows up for this game. So Jake, I think everybody that is watching this knows that it wasn't the same Deshaun Watson that we saw against the Cowboys last week. But I think a lot of people are asking themselves, in terms of the performances that he's put on film for the Browns since coming to Cleveland, where, without seeing the All-22 yet, how do you kind of slot this in terms of the rankings of his efforts in a Browns uniform?
Yeah, I think that's what's probably going to be the most discussed thing in the coming days is how to sort of put into the right lens how Watson played. And on the surface, 22 of 34, 186 is not great. It's not anything to write home about. I think 5 for 20 and a rushing touchdown in there as well. But I would say he played a pretty clean game. He didn't make any catastrophic mistakes in terms of hurting the offense. You would say he salvaged. I would say he salvaged a lot of plays that were not headed in the right direction. And if you kind of remove, there were 4 charted drops. I think you could probably get up to 6 on some of these that were in the vicinity, especially the deep ball left corner to Amari Cooper that would have been a really big chunk play. You're talking about probably like a 225, 230 yard performance. So I thought from the scale, I guess we're scaling it. Like recent Watson scale is the bottom, and then like 2020 Watson scale is the best of him. You're probably putting this kind of in the middle. I thought he was really helpful for the Browns offense at times when they needed him to be helpful. They were dealing with large portions of this game where Jermaine Ifedi was at right tackle, sort of hindering the situation that I think is not in a great place even further. You're missing David Njoku, who is such a nice, warm security blanket at that position for all the different varying things that they do. And I, again, don't think the wide receivers collectively, the group, played a complete football game. So I think he was good. I wouldn't call him great, but he was good. And a bunch of encouraging steps in the right direction for me. I think that's what's most important. Andrew, I think you did a great job of pointing this out in our preview show, which is, listen, guys, preview show is really good. Spot on. If you go back and listen to that in terms of what happened here. We don't toot our horn here often, but sometimes we gotta lay it out.
Occasionally you got to give a little honk.
Into perception, right? The situation with him was like week 1, They won last year, but didn't think he played very well. I thought he made a bunch of really weird decisions in that Bengals game that, from like a play-by-play grade perspective, wouldn't have been very strong. And then the week 2 game, they lose to Pittsburgh. A whole bunch of things happen that really damages the psyche of everybody in that game. But he played better. But you wouldn't think he played better unless you really dug into the film. And I thought this was the same outcome here. It was hard to sort of like lean into that fully because of the week that has been had in Berea and his focus. But like, we definitely talked about the NFL is weird, and he could get a good version of him in this game because of that, and that's ultimately what happened. So credit to him for playing pretty well, and I would imagine this kind of gets like a grade in the 70s, which I think would fit. So again, credit to him. I thought he played one of his better games in the last 2 years, putting this thing together from top to bottom, and I think this is the version of him that it's not the high-end version of him you want, but this is like the winnable version of him, and that's, again, a really nice step. And he took some hits. He got hit a lot, and he seems okay. So we'll see.
Yeah. I think you're right to say that it's the version that they can win with. That's not it's still not a version of the player you could win because of. But I think that the further we get away from the 2020 season, that feels less and less likely to return. You obviously hope that it does, but the win with version is workable, and I think the Browns kind of proved that today in Jacksonville. Peter, it was I think overall a pretty impressive defensive performance. There were some times where in the second half, where they really let the team hang out on the field, the Jacksonville team. A few times where they could have come up with a turnover that would have changed the momentum, but it felt like a pretty good performance from a team that defensively struggled last week against Dallas, bounced back in a big way, and one of their better road performances under Jim Schwartz.
I just want to also say, too, that the winner of this game is anybody who took Doug Peterson as first coach fired for the beginning of the year.
Yeah.
That, to me, was the overlying theme of this game for me. The defense was a lot better. I thought the front and the pressure they got consistently kind of laid the tone for everything else. Trevor Lawrence was almost as uncomfortable, if not more uncomfortable, than when he played against us with a high ankle sprain last year. But I thought that the defense really, JOK, who, as Jake noted during the film, was pretty much absent last week. And I think also what gave me a little bit of comfort about the defense and just the NFL overall, and I mentioned this in last week's, is there were some big blowouts again. And it again reminds me of the NBA a little bit, where like you can lose by 30 in the NBA, and it's just kind of things going poorly for you that don't necessarily reflect, like, looking at the Rams and the Cardinals. I don't think the Cardinals are 35 points better than the Rams. Half the Rams line was out. Just things can just, same with, I don't think the Browns are 80 points worse than the Saints after they boat raced the Cowboys. So trying to put all that into perspective, the defense won this game and deserved it. And really, really credit to them, because they were the shining part of this game, and somehow the decision-making, and I don't even think Watson was bad. Like, he wasn't the thing that really makes you pull your hair out in this game. The bar for him was so low, but the defense, and I think this was also one more comment about the offense, is I thought this was the nicest that Watson has looked inside a Stefanski offense. It seemed like there was like some decision-making and stuff, and just things that he seemed more comfortable with, that you're usually hoping that he just takes this what's there. And it did feel like, for the first time, at least for the first half, like he was really taking things that, you would have hoped Flacco or Jacoby Brissett or other quarterbacks that are kind of at that mid-level would take. So that, I thought, was also an improvement.
That leads right into my next question, Peter, which is essentially, I felt like this was kind of back to, Jake, the Kevin Stefanski offense that we've gotten used to over the course of his tenure in Cleveland. There was more motion, I will say that, but you continue to see an absence of RPOs for the most part. The run game construction felt better and more consistent, but overall it did feel more in line with what we've expected to see from a Stefanski offense than the big sweeping changes that we had kind of come into the season expecting.
Yeah, no, those are the elements that I sort of have been hoping to see, which is a competent ability to run vertically from the gun. I think that's important, to be able to run tight zone, to be able to run inside zone stuff, to be able to run duo, same side power, counter stuff that's not stretched laterally. I do think they are trying to fold in RPOs, and I'm just like, they're not good at them right now, is my thought. I need to watch it. The Dallas game, I was convinced. Let me take that back. I had no conviction on what they were doing with them because some of them I thought should have been thrown. This one, you got to kind of go back and rewatch and slow it down and see all the angles to see where the quarterback's eyes are and stuff like that. So I don't want to speak out of pocket on that one, but they looked like they were incorporating some by the pace at which the backfield is moving. Obviously on RPO stuff and the guys up front, it's going to look a little weird because the offensive linemen are almost playing basketball, like pick and roll ball here. You can use your hands where you can't unless you're Draymond Green. Through the years, you can use your hands in football to shield people, but you can't get more than a yard upfield. So it looks a little strange, and the backfield movement's a little slow because you have the mesh point stuff. And I noticed it a few times. Obviously, they have not been pulling and throwing the football as well as we would like to see them incorporating some of that stuff. But encouraging signs and formations I liked in this one. Definitely an uptick in motion, although we're going to have to do some of the most comprehensive digging work on why. And it wasn't just isolated to the Browns. All of a sudden, they're calling illegal shifts on any we called that orbit motion back in the day, which is a big looping. It's kind of like meant to emulate a big looping, like planet around another planet type stuff here, where it's like behind the quarterback, and like we don't know what's that about because there was the cheat motion stuff I've been very in tune with because the Dolphins sort of changed that for the league last year. Is sort of this motion at the snap where I always thought it was outside the tackle box. And you were leaning toward the line of scrimmage, like you were kind of shading, fading toward the line of scrimmage. Obviously, it's like emulating some of the stuff the CFL does where they can run forward at the snap. But this stuff is like in trying to like figure out what's going on because the Browns ran it twice and it was called both times. Then the Jags had that very key touchdown overturned at 16-10 on the same call, neither of which the last two I watched, anybody's going forward. They're both going lateral in the backfield. And I believe I heard the first time something say he didn't come set or something. I'm really confused by it. Maybe it's like something they want to see them wait an extra second before they go in motion. I am not sure. So an answer on that would be lovely. But nonetheless, to your point, it looked like a better comprehensive plan in this one. They still found themselves in too many third and longs. That's 4 of 29 at this point. I think 18. I could be wrong, but I think it's 18 of those third downs. Those 29 have been 3rd and 8 plus, which they had the most in week 1. I mean, the 8 that they had today is going to be up there again. They cannot do that stuff with this group often enough, but steps in the right direction run scheme-wise. They got under center and ran duo and downfield concepts I thought were really good, and then they get a little pin pull, toss, sweep type stuff in there where you're pinning the edge and pulling a player out and around. I just thought it was a better run plan. We talked in the pregame that they needed to run between the tackles to be able to get some vertical movement on these guys and between Ford, and a large chunk of that 34 came on that 4th and short inches play that was well designed, but they ended up going between the two of them like 21 for 106, and that's like a successful group format for them, and I like seeing Foreman involved a little bit more. So perfect, no, but you can see maybe like they're building toward having a little bit more diversion in what they're going to be doing offensively without trying to just throw everything against the wall. And I thought that was on display in this one. It just felt like a better game plan and a chance to operate the game plan.
The thing that's so infuriating, and Andrew, I'm curious what stuck out to you about this, is it feels like the script that we all know as Browns games are high leverage plays that go against us for luck or a penalty that seem to be really impactful and kind of determine usually the outcome of the game. Perfect example is Dustin Hopkins meandering over the 50-yard line. And there were several other of those, especially on offense. But just kind of like curious what stood out to you in terms of the thing that made this feel like a classic Browns game, even though they snuck out with a win.
No, I think what you're describing is really it. I think that, and then the parade of holding calls at the end of the game where they were just trying to run clock and then ended up, being in a situation where they couldn't even kick the field goal. They end up settling for the punt. Obviously, it works out in their favor because they pin them deep. It turns into a safety. That sort of escape from that. I mean, the classic Browns script there is that you go all the way back and then you punt it and then the other team returns it for a touchdown, something like that. So the fact that there was kind of this shift in the narrative where the punter absolutely nails, that's, I think, the best punt Bojorquez has had as a Cleveland Brown. And then it turns into a safety, that kind of lets them off the hook for a large portion of really, I mean, some of the sloppiest football that we've seen since Kevin Stefanski's been the head coach. And so it's one of the things that I think we got to talk about tonight, which is it's another 13 penalties for 100 yards. I know there was another one or two declined there. And I think, Peter, you asked this question in our Slack during the game. Who do you blame for these? And Jake's answer was everyone. And I think that's like such a great way to distill what's up right now, which is just the players deserve blame, the coaches deserve blame. Anybody that goes to work at that building in Berea deserves some blame. It just feels overwhelming, and that level of there's like sloppy and you're ironing it out, and then there's whatever this has been over the first 2 weeks, and it's very hard for me to I just don't know what you solve with that other than hoping that most referee crews don't call it the way that they called it today, because it seems almost unavoidable. Some of these holding calls are really blatant. They're not close.
Yeah, so holding happens for a couple reasons. First of which is you're beat. Like, that's pretty simple. Like, you got beat, you're off balance, you grab a hold of something and pray for the best, right? The alternative here is I get my quarterback killed, so I got to hold on for dear life because I got beat. Those happen. There's also somebody doing something around you wrong gets you in trouble, right? You think it's a run concept that's going to be run up inside, and then ultimately a guy bounces the football outside, and then that leads to you kind of being in a position. You feel that you don't have the correct position because somebody took the ball at a position behind you, whether that's a wide receiver or that's a running back. Maybe they bounce it outside on a run scheme that they're supposed to be running up inside, and then you hold on right there. So those are two. And then the other is like a quarterback bailing out of the pocket. You just don't really have a great feel for where your quarterback's going to be within the pocket, and that can lead to some times where you think at this moment, based on my feel of these reps, he's going to be at this spot and he's not. Then you can get caught holding because a guy is going in a direction you didn't expect, and you think you're beat even though you're not beat. So it's a mixture of things. The thing you need to know is that they're not teaching these guys to hold. That's clear. But there's also a way to phrase this is like everything comes back on the coaches, and that is not fair sometimes, and it is fair sometimes. Somebody ultimately has to pay that bill at dinner, right? So like if the guys on the field can't get it done, then it goes back to the GM one way or the other. If the guys are good enough to get it done, they've proven it in other places, and you're not getting it out of them, then it comes back to the coaching. So like nobody's going through individual drills working on how to hold. That's not a thing. But it is the only reason you are ever holding is because you are out of place or somebody around you is doing something incorrect that causes you to feel like you're out of place. So that stuff is hard to always pin down. I think there's some obvious situations like the Browns went backward 2 straight times. Yeah. The first one was Wyatt Teller, just not the second one, was Wyatt Teller. He got beat and held.
Yeah, he got whooped.
Just got whooped. The one with Postage was he just wasn't in the place he needed to be. You don't get your feet where you need to be. Your base isn't right, so you can't move with that person. Every holding is its own story. But I think it's like the question is right. Like, who do we blame? How do we stop it? Well, you just need to be better. You need to have a better feel for where the defense is going to be reacting. You need to have a better feel for what the people are doing behind you. And I think that is a cohesiveness that comes with playing together more, right? Like, I know when Deshaun's going to scramble. I've got an internal clock that tells me he likes to do this, that, or the other. So it's not weird if I'm the guard and I notice my guy is immediately going this direction, probably because Deshaun tried to escape vertically through the pocket. And I shouldn't hold because he'll be gone. I don't need to. It's just like they need experience together. Sean needs to stay healthy and play. And I do think some of this stuff will clean itself up over time.
Do you think it's possible after getting absolutely decimated in the trenches week 1, giving up as many pressures as they did, that they said, actually, you guys could hold a little bit more? Like if you're going to get beat and blow a play, blow a play up.
I wanted to coach James Hudson that's for sure.
I mean, I'm not really joking. Because if Teller doesn't hold, that could be a much more negative play with a defensive tackle basically coming through untouched.
Yeah, I think you got to bake in a couple holding calls are going to happen. Like these guys are gigantic human beings that it's really hard for them to move. But you get to a volume of those, you guys would agree with me that it's like, okay, you're on the sideline sitting down as an offensive line. You got to say, hey, we got to cut this stuff out. We got to figure out a better answer here because they're calling it, right? You do sit together and you're like, man, we're getting away with a lot of stuff. We're pushing the envelope here. So, yeah, you feel out the officiating crew early. You try to make sure you're not doing it blatantly. It's definitely something that you don't try to ignore because it happens. Like every offensive lineman will be like, it's not holding unless they call it, right? So
Right.
I do think it's different crew to crew, obviously. But from what I'm seeing on first watch, like I just thought Postage played a bad game. I thought he was out of position so often, and then he doesn't have a great feel for when he's done, and then thus letting go of somebody because some of those where you're holding a guy's arm from trying to reach out, it's like that guy's arm is not making that play, man. So I just thought he didn't play very well. We'll look at the rest of them, but I know Postage had a couple, Hudson, Teller, and then I think there's one more in there I'm missing. But 5 of them in the game is 50 yards of penalties that you just can never afford.
Right.
I just have to say something that is not productive, so I apologize in advance. We have a coach on our staff who was the Tennessee Titans head coach for 6 years. And in the 6 years he was the head coach in Tennessee, there were only 4 times they had double-digit penalties in 6 years.
That's a good stat.
The Browns in Stefanski's tenure have doubled that in 3 years and change, or well, 4 years and change.
Yeah.
That's obviously very cherry picked to make a point, but there is just, to me, something where I think Kevin, and I was telling you guys this today during the game, that 4th down play, that is classic and the best version of Stefanski. And what he was doing in the first half, especially with the offense, was things were humming. But to me, there is sometimes a lack of institutional control with discipline of these penalties. It makes me think about Vrabel, which I know is not healthy or productive after a win, but there has to be some level of accountability, and I am a big Stefanski fan, but if these aren't cleaned up, and this team, we're in second place in the North, and that's great, but the 2 teams behind us are substantively better. I think it's easy to say right now, and it's not. I don't see this version of the Cleveland Browns going toe to toe in Arrowhead, and losing by a field goal. That I definitely don't see that. And maybe I'm being hyperbolic, but
No,
that's the bitter taste in my mouth after this.
Yeah,
game.
I think this to me is a great example of what Jake said. Like you'd rather fix this at 1-1, to your point, Peter, because you're not in the basement. You know, the pressure is on Baltimore right now. The pressure is on Cincinnati to a certain degree here because they're, I think especially the Ravens, right? Like it felt like they had a good chance to win that game in Kansas City. They didn't get it done. All of a sudden they come home and it should be feels pretty easy. They lose a game to the Raiders that, again, I was watching the Browns game, but from what I could tell, it looked like there were some opportunities there for them to win that game. So yeah, that you're feeling the heat there. I think you're absolutely right that the Browns obviously have to address this, and I do think it's useful to remind people what the standard can be. Right? Vrabel's a good example. There are other examples. Some coaches emphasize certain things more, and as a result, produce teams that create fewer penalties. That's just like a fact of the NFL, and I think it's a helpful reminder now that we're in year 5 for Kevin Stefanski that this might be part of having a Browns team coached by him, is that you're going to get a really beautiful looking 4th down call that picks up 30 some yards. You're also going to have games where they go for 12 penalties, and it materially hampers their ability to win the game, put the game away, that sort of thing.
Yeah, you got to think through the years, run game wise, they stress their offensive line to do some of the hardest stuff offensive linemen can do because they're running and blocking simultaneously and like relying on them to feel out when a running back is going to cut off of that, and they have a 3-way go. Whereas a lot of teams with vertical run game, it's just the variance of player movement is less wide, and I do think that the Browns have been very boom bust as a run team because of this. Like they create really big runs, and they have, as we've noted over the last few years, had a higher -0 run percentage than they want. So I'm sure they're going to continue to talk about this. It is somewhat scheme driven here because I think it's really a challenging thing to run all the time, having these guys move, run laterally. I think they haven't been good enough this year, though. Ultimately, I think that's sort of what it is. If this trend continues, it's definitely going to keep them from becoming a surefire offense that's gonna. I mean, I think the ceiling of this offense is pushing to be in an average offense. You can still do some things with an average offense here, but they cannot continue to make it harder on themselves than it already is. But yeah, there's layers to this, and definitely something we will talk about this week as a site, like looking at why are they holding so much. But I think it's some personal accountability that has to happen from veterans, like really good veterans that have been around this team for a while. I mean, Hudson had a hold, but like he has not been the problem through 2 weeks. Like he's not. I actually think the interior between Joel and Postage has been the bigger issue. And even if like the right side, with Dewan has been fine for the most part too, outside of the 2 false start penalties. So again, they need to just play. Sometimes the answer is so simple, stupid. It's like it is what it is. Like they just need to perform better up front from the guys that we are expecting to perform better. And if that can sort of shift a little bit over the next few weeks, then they have a chance because they have a couple really winnable games right in front of them.
The other,
I don't know. Is that Raiders game?
Yeah, I think that'll be tougher than expected just because of how tough their defense is. That could be a real slugfest out there in Vegas. The other trend, Jake, that's right in line with the penalty thing that we have to talk about is the third down problems. You understand it to a large extent against Dallas because they were behind the chains so often, third and long so often. But today there were quite a few third and shorts. Now, of course, they're 3 for 3 on fourth down, which does help. But you got to give Jameis Winston credit for those to a certain extent, right? I mean, he did some sneaking. He did some quality sneaking. So
listen, quarterback sneaks are not about diving fast. That's what I
right.
want to teach you guys. You sometimes can understand, hey, they're pinching these guys, nose, double A, they're shooting into. I'm just going to take a step back and just going to then
let them
fall
roll right
on
past
top
me.
of those guys.
Yep.
That's exactly it. So there is an art form to it. It is not just
100%.
grab and go, get low. No, it's like the tush
You
push
saw,
makes it
I mean,
oversimplified.
Joe Burrow
at
take
times.
one of the most vicious hits from Leo Chenal that we've seen recently against the Bengals today on a sneak. He got it, but he got he got whacked in the process because he did exactly what you're talking about. He just rushed into the A gap and or the whatever over the center, and it just got blown up. So, but I think third down wise, it is just a function of the pass game being where the pass game is, right? I mean, that's really, I think, like at the risk of oversimplifying it, they just are really struggling to throw the ball down the field.
Yeah. So again, you laid this out well. There were a couple instances where I thought that they were running for 2 plays to get a first down. Like then that's to me is okay. If you're going for it on fourth down, then I don't have as much an issue with you running it and not getting it because it's third and short and it's hard as heck to pick up third and shorts for the most part. But like I would say pairing that with an aggressive fourth down approach is good. They deserve credit for that. I like their and I like their little split back 1993 look to it. That was kind of a nice little wrinkle. Always appreciate that. He used to get funky with Harrison Bryant last year, so he's going to continue to do that. And then to your point, 8 of those 14 were 8+, which is the hardest play to convert third and long in the NFL, no matter what, because defenses get exotic and pressure looks, and it just becomes an absolute nightmare to pick up those looks, and then the coverage can get funky. They need to be better. You got to convert more than like 2 of 20. Can you do that? Like 1 of 18. They got to find like a 30-40% number there. But yeah, they have been pretty bad on third down. And then there's the time too where like, help yourselves out. Can we get Amari to just catch that drag, on the mesh there and just kind of fall forward, man? Like, know the situation. We don't really need you to create, try to jump outside. Just a bad Amari Cooper game. And we'll talk about it. He's too good for this. It won't continue. He'll be better. But like, they overcame some things today, I think is a thing to keep in mind about what was sort of in front of them traveling, going down there and without David. And like we talked about, some performances from some guys that were not up to the standard as well, and they got over that hump. So I was pleased with that, and Jerry Jeudy is on a nice little path. I feel good about him after a couple games. So there's plenty of positive to break in there too. But yeah, the third down stuff has to get better. It's got to get better.
When do you raise an alarm about Amari Cooper?
Well, I mean, the things he's doing are so out of character. It's not running away from. It's not like he's slow now. Like he's he's himself. He's just not like those really weird drop. He's had some of those throughout his career sprinkled in. So I am not worried. I'm a guys on the north side of 30 as wide receivers. My eyebrow is always raised. I think he's 30. Is he 29, 30, or did that happen yet officially for him? I can't remember. I think it did.
He's in his 30s.
That's right. So those are the Browns were reluctant to give him another year, right?
Yes,
Because
Andrew, he turned 32 months ago.
Nice job, guys. Nailed it. I think that the framework for me is north of 30, as weird a line that can be sometimes.
Old man.
You do look at NFL old at that position, but I don't feel like he's slowed down. I don't feel like the route running is any worse. I just feel like he's had a couple days of games of uncharacteristic drops, and just I also think there's some of the stuff. Week 1 is such a toss out where I'm just kind of concerned about where they were trying to figure out where to get the football, and I think the Cowboys had a pretty good feel for where they were trying to get the football too. But this one, he was getting targeted. It's not hanging on to it, and I don't think that that's ever been a part of his career. And I think any wide receiver who gets older will tell you it's not that I can't catch the football anymore, so I can't separate. I don't have the twitchiness I used to have, the suddenness. So if the drops continue for a while, I'll get concerned. But I think he's going to bounce back. I think he's going to be fine. I think we've seen 2 of the worst games he's probably going to play this year, if you ask me. It's probably a slow camp thing, right?
And you alluded to the emergence of Jerry Jeudy, which has happened, I think, in part to the fact that Watson hasn't been looking at Cooper as much. And there does seem to be, beyond just Cooper dropping, there just seems to be a little bit of desynchronization between Cooper and Watson, which I think can have a few different causes. Like you mentioned, the camp part of it is certainly interesting. But good news that Jerry Jeudy has shown up and had a great game today, and including a few key catches. There's obviously that very early 2nd and 20 that could have been a pick, turned out to work. It's one of those no, yes situations that sometimes works out in your favor in the NFL. Overall, it feels to me, with Njoku hurt, Cooper struggling, they are still limited pass game wise, even from where we thought 10 days ago before the Dallas game they would be. And I think that's when you start to evaluate what the quarterback, what the offense has looked like through 2 games, I do think that's part of it. So in terms of positivity, it is easy to paint a picture after these 2 games of the offense making incremental improvement, getting people back, getting more of the talent involved in the offense. I think one of the things that's worth talking about just overall is how diversified the offense was. You mentioned Deontay Foreman getting involved, right? There were passes to David Bell early on. More names on the stat sheet than there were last week, where it felt like if Njoku wasn't making a play or Cooper wasn't making a play, you were kind of out of luck. Moore had a pretty good start to the game. I mean, it's worth mentioning, Kevin Stefanski's opening script for this game was, I think, flawless. I don't know what you could say about what that first drive was that isn't complimentary to him as a play caller.
It was a good mix, man. A good mix of the run concepts you wanted to see. It was a good mix of some third down cover 3 beaters that I thought they needed to run and put in place. They had some nice mesh designs, I thought, and just rub routes in general that made things hard for Jags to cover them in the way that they wanted to cover them. And it was a great balance. And I thought the quarterback play was pretty good in it, getting out of the structure of some of those and creating on some longer down and distances too. So yeah, I mean, I agree. That was this is the end of the first quarter. Like the Browns have marched 12 minutes off the clock on this ludicrous drive. And that's a tone setting sort of scenario. And they deserved a lot of credit for that. They had some longer drives in this game. Obviously the second half got a little tight, a little condensed. I thought we need to look into what happened first half to second half, deeper. I thought the Jags just played a bit more of their aggressive brand from week 1. But yeah, the opening script was really good, and you need to score on those as often as you can. It was nice to see them punch it in as well. Got a little help from a roughing the passer call, but yeah, nice to see him punch it in.
I know this is just stupid fan complaining about the same thing and twice in the same podcast, but that penalty on Hopkins just absolutely changed the tenor of this game. It went from them looking at potentially being up 17-0, 4 minutes to go in the second quarter, after absolutely dominating possession, and him just meandering in a rule that you should know in your sleep if that's your only job. And that's the kind of stuff where we're up 17-0. The defense is looking different. We're running the ball more. This could be a 27-14 game. And we're riding high, and that changes everything we're talking about in terms of holding calls, how Watson played, drops, And that is the Browns experience. And I don't think it's unique to other teams or fan bases, but I don't know them, where you're just like, this moment, is going to hang over everything we watch for the rest of the game. And it totally did, and really disappointing from the special teams there.
Yeah, I think overall special teams have been very disappointing for the Browns through 2 games, considering who they have as their special teams coordinator, the reputation that he brought to Cleveland. I think it's right that we have some frustration about that. Again, as with the penalty conversation overall, can you hang every penalty by the special teams on the neck of the coordinator? No, but you can say the kicker should know for a certainty not to cross the 50-yard line. That feels... Where's he going anyway? We don't want him involved with the tackling. That cost him the end of last year. So where's he going? I mean, if I'm the coordinator, I'm saying, Dustin, you can just feel free to walk in a leisurely manner back to the bench. There's literally no chance that we want you to be involved in this tackle. Feel free to just come on back to the bench, enjoy a Gatorade. We will let you know when we need you again. Seems easy enough to me. I don't know. So, yeah, there's some frustration there. And I think overall there's some frustration, but I want to kind of anchor our thoughts. Last week was so disappointing, without a doubt. This week was at times exciting, at times frustrating, but overall you feel better. As I said, it feels like the team is figuring some things out week over week. There remains, it would be remiss not to mention, a gigantic cloud of uncertainty over the quarterback. How do you, after 2 games, just generally speaking, feel about this team? We've got the Giants at home next week. We talked about the Raiders on the road in 2 weeks. Peter, how do you feel overall about the trajectory of this team? It's got to be better than last week, but just kind of ballpark that for me.
You started this podcast, and you were right. A win is a win, and you've got to enjoy it. I don't think my opinion about Watson has changed. I don't feel like what he's delivering from a level of quarterback play is above replacement level. You can't convince me that, Jameis might make some different mistakes or take some different risks, but very kind of Flacco-esque to me in his career in terms of like big risk, big reward. So I'll say this, I don't feel like the success of the team depends on what happens to Watson. And if everything else is attended to, I am optimistic that the AFC North is in an interesting place. And I know, Jake, you predicted them to win the division. And this is a pretty good start for that because Pittsburgh has done absolutely nothing for me to be afraid of them. I'm always going to be afraid of Baltimore, but I guess I'm not optimistic or pessimistic, but I'm still interested, which for the 2 weeks that we've had sure feels like a victory.
Yeah, I think there was some expectation that after week 1, as bad as that was, if the game week 2 was similar, you would start to have some doubts about where this team is headed. Certainly, winning that game tough on the road against another team that has playoff aspirations, certainly, it does make you feel more balanced, I would say.
Well, before we get to Jake, Andrew, you have been, I think, staunchly pessimistic in a very grounded sense for this, in a very like rational way that I feel like has been.
Yeah.
Usually, if you're talking about pessimism, it feels like you are Eeyoring it a little bit. But how do you feel after this game and looking at the rest of the season?
Well, thank you for asking, first of all. I don't feel much different, honestly, than I felt. I think I don't feel that the quarterback is as much of a disaster, but I also think that the Browns playing from ahead against the team that in the first half kind of declined to put the same pressure on him that the Cowboys did last week, it didn't really showcase his flaws in the same way that Dallas game did. And I think to me, that doesn't mean that they're not there. So I agree with what Jake said. You cannot complain after a win. It's not what I want to do. But if you're talking about long term, I think, Peter, what you said about where you stack this team up versus like what the Bengals did going into Arrowhead and losing by 1, this doesn't really favorably compare to that. Because I think the other thing you said, Doug Peterson is probably getting fired this year. That team looks lost. They look wretched. And I think this should have been a blowout because of how poorly the Jaguars performed, and it wasn't. And that, I think, is what tempers my enthusiasm.
Yeah, I think the further we get away from things at training camp, I think they are really viewing this as 4 preseason games, which is
100%.
such a scary way to
It's
operate.
a gamble. It's a gigantic. It's
Yeah,
putting the entire season on the table
yeah.
and saying, "All right, big money, big money. Let's roll these dice."
And I think too, we've talked about the injuries force them to do some of this in a way. The
Sure,
quarterback's coming back from a major shoulders injury himself. Like, I'm not sure how much of it was a choice and how much of it was like we have no choice. Like, that's more of an internal
that's fair.
discussion thing that
That is fair.
we have to like give them some patience on. But I would say we talked about this kind of after the 49ers game last year, where it's like that field goal goes through the uprights. It feels a lot different, right? Because you miss some opportunities that could have iced that game away at the end, and this one's the same sort of thing. I definitely think the Jags are bad. I think the Doug Peterson narrative is going to fit. Like Trevor Lawrence after the game said, "We suck." Like they're very blunt about how things are going down there. But
nobody's happy down there, man. Oh
no,
boy,
they're not. But they've played in 2 games they could have won, right? So like,
definitely.
The Browns aren't good enough right now to make the playoffs, but that doesn't matter. Like week 2
Right.
doesn't matter. Like you need to figure it out over the course of the next 5 weeks to be a team by October, as they always say. Like get to Halloween. What the Belichick theory is, like by Halloween we need to be our best version. If you can get to that and have yourselves 6-7 wins, like we talked about preseason, then you can just like roll the dice the second half of the year and let's see how it goes. The Ravens are 0-2. The Bengals are 0-2, 2 teams we think are at the top of the division. And I'm sorry, Pittsburgh will always have my respect, but they will never be a team that I can truly fear anymore, just because of the fact like their offense will never drive them away from people. It'll always be like they're cruise controlling right in front of you, and if you hit the pedal at the right time and draft off of them, you can pass them. So like where I'm at in this is it's uncomfortable to think of it as the preseason, but it's quite clear like we got hopeful after the Conklin Wills return to practice thing that they were going to play. No, this is their training camp. They're going through training camp to amp themselves up to get ready to play. I think some of the same stuff is going on here. Some parts of it are refined. They've been out there, they've been doing everything, but the cohesiveness, the whole is not a painted picture yet. So the hard thing to do is ask people in the NFL, which is the least patient sport in football, to be patient, and especially people who talk about the thing every day. Like we're trying to navigate that, but I think that what they're trying to do is, and Kevin, he's been vocal about it too. Like we're going to learn the early portions of the year, what we're good at, who we are. And I think they're in the process of that. It would be nice, like today, that in the process of that, you sort of also figure out how to win them as well, because it's pretty dang important to the bottom line of everybody here. So they won today. Wasn't pretty. I don't think you leave here thinking, yeah, man, let's go to Arrowhead next week. Sign us up. Like that's not where anybody is, but I think it's worth feeling good about. There are some really key players who played dynamite football. Myles Garrett is still an alien, right? Grant Delpit and JOK were everywhere. I think Grant and I listen, I think Greg Newsome's got some elements of his game that are troublesome at times, but he's doing well, and Emerson's covering well. They're covering well. I thought Ronnie Hickman, who stepped in for Thornhill, didn't miss a beat. At least we'll watch the tape, but he didn't miss a beat, which is encouraging. Jordan Hicks looks comfortable. I think they're getting good pressure up front. On the flip side of that, the offense, Jerry Judy's taking off. Elijah Moore had a better game than I think some people anticipated today. There's a lot of positive. Jordan Akins looks like a competent tight end when he's had to step in here, allow David to get a couple weeks to get that foot right. I think Deontay Foreman was such a good balancing act with Jerome Ford. There's some good here. There's a lot of good here, which we're going to cover this week, and that's important to remember. But they're not good enough yet. So pump the brakes, but they're 1-1 and they have a real chance with the next 3 games. Like no one is taking any of these lightly. They know that they're not above any of them. But when you look at these 3, like if you could find a way to come out of this sitting there, 3-1, something like that, like that would be a home run, and you have a chance to do that, and it's all right in front of you, and you feel pretty good coming back to Cleveland. So listen, there's a lot of negative to bake into this recipe, but there's also a lot of positive that we should be feeling too as they continue to sort of learn the identity of this football team who's been missing like several strands of DNA leading up to the point that they're at right now. So again, not overly home run feel here, but it's a victory Monday, it's a victory Sunday night, and you should feel good about them figuring out how to get this game done when it mattered most.
I will say one more positive thing.
Please.
And that's 5 years into the Stefanski tenure. What you just described, Jake, is good teams just get through the first 6 weeks. And for us as Browns fans for the last 2.5 decades, any win was a huge deal. Any win, we were unlocking Bud Light fridges and
that's
storming the streets just for a win over the mediocre Jets. And it is a maturation of our fandom and also the team to move to this place where we're just saying, be 4-2 and see what happens. And I think that is something we're not also used to, but it is a valid point by you to say, like, it might not be right that they're treating us like the preseason, but they are 1-1 for 2 games that we thought were going to be tough for them to win both of them. We're just still in it, and I would rather be here than Baltimore or Cincinnati, even if the competition is tougher.
Amen. There you go. All right, so we'll wrap it up there. We appreciate everybody joining us. We will have obviously extensive coverage on Browns Film Breakdown all week of what happened in Jacksonville and what's coming next as they prepare to play the Giants. So please join us there on the website, obviously the podcast on a daily basis, and just excited to have a little bit more fun talking about the Browns than we did last week. So definitely join us for that. I do also want to shout out the great work that Jake did on the game recap, which is now on brownsfilmbreakdown.com. If you have not been checking those out, it is a deep, deep dive into what happened in the game. Much more juice there than your typical game recap. A lot of video and analysis that I think really sums up kind of what we actually saw and what it meant, more than just kind of telling you what happened. So very excited about that. So check that out, please, if you have not. We will be back, as I said, tomorrow with more on Browns Film Breakdown, the website, and the podcast. Until then, everybody, have a great day. Go Browns.
Go Browns.
Go Browns.